Okay, I think we're recording. Perfect. So hi, Mehr. Welcome to this debriefing discussion. And I want to start off by congratulating you on 710, Q49, V38. How are you feeling?
Great. I'm feeling ecstatic that I'm finally gotten done with it.
Yeah,
it's great.
it's super
I mean,
painful, definitely.
700 score. Yeah, just the moment of, looking at a score which is above 700 coming from where I started with. So that's been very nice. I mean, I'm excited. I'm happy with the score.
So let's talk about it. Where did you start? How, or like, why did you think about taking the GMAT in the first place?
Right. So, given the pandemic, I think I assessed it was a good amount with business slowing down. I assessed it was a good point of time for me to, take a break and, come back or go for my MBA and maybe figure out better ways of approaching the business and improving things back at home. So it felt like a good time to go and, get that MBA done. So that's how I started thinking about getting the GMAT. When I started with the GMAT prep, I think the first thing I did was give a mock on the give one of those e-Sigma mocks on e-GMAT, and I got a score of 640. I don't exactly remember the breakup, but neither of it was too good. So, yeah.
So you started with an e-GMAT mock straight away. You didn't go through, let's say, your official GMAT mock or some other free resources, none of that stuff.
No. So I started with the e-GMAT mock, but then I went on to enroll with some other agency, and went on to enroll with some other agency because I hadn't heard too much about e-GMAT at that point in time, and I stayed with the other agency for about, say, a month or two, and I figured once I started doing the mocks on their platform, I realized that I wasn't making too much headway in terms of quant, which is where I was really lacking the finesse or expertise. So I was basically looking for something that could help me with my basics, and not so much, just the tougher questions. So that's when I went back to e-GMAT.
What sort of progress do you think you made in that, like, 45 days, month? Studying fairly in an unstructured way?
Yeah, so actually that was one of the important things that made me realize that I wanted to enroll with something that could give me more structure in how to study, because that was like an offline course. That was not an online course with somebody guy. So I had a set of material, and I think one of the key things which was lacking was to just understand how to go about the whole process, like which are the topics that you need to tackle first and then tackle next, and those kind of things. So I'm not saying that I didn't make any progress at all. Sure. I definitely made some amount of progress, but not to the kind of, I mean, at best, it could have pushed me to like a 670 or a 680. I was not doing well with the 700 level questions at all, which is when I came to realize that the problem was with not knowing the basics. I was not knowing the basics. So also, I think then I went back to e-GMAT and I realized I spoke to one of their counselors. I reached out to one of their counselors to basically get a little more sense into the course. They also had some free sample videos which I went through of their modules, which I went through, and I realized that what I really liked is that even though it's the GMAT, they really still started with the basics, like as good as what is a prime number. So I think that was very critical for me, because time and again, everyone that I spoke to, one thing which was constant is if you have to get a score above 700, if you have to get that Q51, you really need to know your basics very well to be able to crack any of those tougher questions within that amount of time that you get on the GMAT. So that's how I enrolled.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So when you talk about like 700 level questions, the basics are the same. It's just that it's questioning those basics in a very new way, which you've never seen before. And how did you go about building those basics, like you mentioned?
Yeah, so obviously first I developed on the basis the e-Sigma mock that I gave. We developed on which were my weaker areas and which were my not so weaker areas so picked up a schedule on which are the topics that I needed to spend more amount of time on.
Yeah, like a person helped you do this,
And
or like did you do it in the platform?
yes,
Like how did you do this?
I did this on the platform. I
Got it.
obviously also discussed it with the counselor of e-GMAT after I had done
Sure.
my mock, and he reviewed my mock and explained to me how the process would work. And also, I think the platform itself is also very explanatory in terms of how you should approach every module. Like, start with step 1 and go to the practice questions and then go to the advanced questions. I think the way the whole course is structured, in the sense of how even something like number properties is divided into like 12 different topics, and each topic has sub questions, and then it has the section questions. So then you're like, it's just really trying to assure that you have your foundations of your basics are very, very strong.
Sure.
So I think that's, yeah, so I think that's what really helped with e-GMAT, and of course having access to the Scholaranium, which was very nice, because I think the one thing that I really liked about it is I kind of like to make sure that I've done a particular topic really well before I move on to the next. So the ability to actually just, narrow down specific topic wise questions to practice on. So I know exactly where falling back or behind, or having covered one topic completely properly. So, just customizing your tests to your ability. So I think that was nice. So those
earlier
kind of,
you mentioned that you weren't making a lot of headway earlier in your prep. You just were not satisfied with that. So do you think Scholaranium could use it to track your progress, or to know that you completely performed well on one topic before moving on to the next one? Is that something that you used?
Yes, definitely. Because I think when you're just giving like a mock, you have like, when you're in a platform that is just throwing mocks at you, you are approaching like maybe 2 questions per topic, and you still don't know if I mean, you could know those 2 questions on that topic really well and not know like 10 others. So you don't know if you actually don't know that topic really well. So with having the ability to have a question bank that solely focuses on a particular topic, you know that you've covered kind of the questions that range, right, like from all kinds of questions that could probably come in that topic. So if you've mastered that, then you know that, okay, maybe you've mastered the topic. So and I think also each of those sections had difficult questions, medium questions, easy questions, and to know exactly whether you answered the tougher ones right or the ones that you got right were only the easier ones. So that also gives you an indication of whether you're actually getting the 700 level questions right. If you're just approaching, I'm just talking about other platforms, because if you're just approaching a mock wherein you don't know if the question was a 700 level question or a 600 level question, because honestly, when you're starting out, it's not so easy to maybe evaluate what could be like a 700 level question or what could be a 650 level question. So knowing that also kind of helped me build my confidence, or know whether I was getting the tougher ones right or not getting the tougher.
Did you also maybe track the amount of time you were spending on the harder questions? Because it's also important to get those questions right in the right amount of time.
Yes. So I think that's what I'm talking about. With e-GMAT, you basically could track your performance in a very holistic manner, knowing exactly what kind of level of difficulty questions that you were getting right, which ones were you getting wrong, how much time were you spending on even the right ones. If you were getting, I think with the GMAT, it's also very important. You can get a question right in about 4 minutes, and that is not the right way
it throws off your entire timing for the entire section.
Yeah, because if you're getting something right in 4 minutes, then that's also not, then you're also probably not approaching the question in the right way. Because I think another thing that I've learned is, however tough the GMAT may seem, every question could probably be solved in about 2 minutes. If you know your basics, or you know the way to handle the question. So yeah. So yeah, that's how
you built your foundation, and then that's what I think e-GMAT tries to emphasize. You first build your foundation, then you track your progress. What did you do next after tracking your progress in Scholaranium?
So I continue to give more mocks, say every 2 weeks, see how I was building progress across. And I think ultimately my last mock was around 690. And then I studied for a bit more and went ahead to give my official GMAT mocks, wherein I got a 740 and a 750, at which point in time I had to go ahead and, book the GMAT and give it. So that's...
So you took the official mocks 1 and 2, or did you take 3 and 4?
No, so I just took the 1 and 2. I'd never given them before, but I was kind of saving it for the end because I've been told that those are the ones which are most accurate to the exam. So I wanted to save them for when I've really done with my prep.
Right. So did you think the questions were similar to what you had faced on e-GMAT mocks? Do you think the experience was comparable?
Yes, definitely. It was definitely a comparable experience. The questions were very on. I think also depends on, I think, how well you're doing in the exams, because if you're not doing too well in the mocks, then you're not really touching the 750 level questions to know. But still, the difficulty level was very comparable, and I think the fact that towards the end I got a 690, and then spent a little more time on it to figure out where I was going wrong. And then moved on, say a 740 and 750. I could say that they were very comparable to the actual exam. Yeah.
Got it. And you took a bunch of mocks. Did you also maybe use the mock to learn where you're lacking and learn from that to sort of build your strategy post mock?
Right. So that was one of the most important things that I learned about my GMAT process, and also after speaking to a lot of people, was that it's really important to review what you've done, because even the mocks per se, so especially the mocks per se, because until and unless, I mean, if you're just going to look at a score and see that you scored questions wrong, you're not going to know why you scored them wrong. So so I definitely did review all of my mocks thoroughly, went through, and the other thing which is also also different in e-GMAT compared to the other platform that I was on, is that there wasn't just a simple solution. There was like a whole explanation as to what the solution is, and how do you derive the solution to even the questions in the mocks. So that was very helpful. Yeah.
Got it. So you booked the exam, you appeared for the exam, you faced some technical difficulties. Take me through that. Must have been a very weird experience.
Right. So it was actually very unfortunate, although maybe I kind of think it maybe worked in my favor also a bit, but I gave the exam when I started the exam. It was the online version. When I started the exam, for the first 30 minutes, my exam did not start. Once my exam finally did start, once I was done with my con section, my proctor mentioned that he couldn't see my video, and when they could see my video, my exam wouldn't work. So I think that went in back and forth for about an hour. It was really, and the other thing is that when all of this is happening, they don't pause the timer. So you're also losing out on time when the questions are going on. So I think ultimately we decided to cancel the exam due to the technical difficulties. The sad bit was that I'd almost spent about 3 hours just trying to get my con section done, right from the time that I sat to give the exam. So that was kind of mentally frustrating, but kind of lucky to have worked out in my favor, because my con section was not going well that day. So I was more than happy for them to cancel the exam. But a little bit of problem there, because it took them almost a week to, send across to determine it was a technical difficulty and send across a voucher to rebook the exam, and then to have to find the availability on the right timing during the end of December was a little tough. But so I had to push everything into the last minute, maybe not leaving me with an opportunity to have that window to give the exam again before my round 2 deadlines. So that was the kind of the technical difficulties I faced. I think it had also to do a little bit with the Apple software, because I think that has a lot of firewalls. So if anyone's giving the exam, I would recommend giving it on a Windows laptop. So yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, Quant, you're coming into your GMAT prep with Quant as a weakness, and I completely understand that, because Quant was my weakness coming in as well. And you sit for your exam, you realize your quant section is going really badly, and then your exam sort of tanks, right? So what mental state are you in? It's like, is your quant jinxed at this point? What are you thinking? And then how did you, more importantly, prep for your final exam for the quant part?
Honestly, yeah, it was very frustrating in that moment to have sat through all that time and then not be able to give the exam, because it's already very nerve-wracking when leading the days up to the exam. And then you're sitting in that position all over again, wondering, oh, should I have to give my exam again in, say about 10 days, and you're thinking about all of that all over again. All of that nervousness is back in. But I one of the reasons why my quant section was not going well is um, because I was not mentally calm about when I was giving the paper. So I got very nervous and scared, and I remember one of the mistakes that I made in the paper was when I was answering the last 5 questions. I figured that I was losing time. I think I figured I was losing time, and one of the things which was in the back of my head was, in the GMAT, there's a bigger penalty attached to not finishing the paper than to answer a question wrong. And I kind of sped through my last 2 questions only to realize that I had 5 minutes left for the last one. So I think just my mental state was very, very angst during the whole paper. And that's why I kind of didn't do well. So I think that was one of the key things that I went into making sure I did better at in my next attempt.
How did you manage that? Like, or did you prep something special that you had not prepped until that point? Like, what did you do?
So no, not really. I didn't prep anything special. Just kind of reminded myself that I needed to be calm through the paper and approach every question properly. It also helped that I had sat through the whole process once already. So that kind of helped me, be a little more calmer about it. But I spent the next 10 days. I think one of the best things in my prep that I did was, which also helps with e-GMAT, by the way, is that questions that you get wrong, you can go back and review them specifically. Right. So it's kind of something that a lot of people, I've read online a lot about, which people make on their Excel. They make one of those keys wherein they go back and check which were the questions that they got wrong. So I kind of just spent some time reviewing questions that I didn't get correctly. It was a funny experience because I hate inequalities in mods, and I hate inequalities in mods and number properties. It's one of my weakest areas. And my first exam, I feel like at least 20 of my questions were from inequalities, mods, and number properties.
Wow.
Like a good percent, almost 60% of my exam was from that section. So I spent a lot of time over the next 5-6 days, again, going through number properties, making sure that I was not, one of the things I usually tend to do is I deflect away from things that I feel nervous about. So I made sure that I went back to number properties and tackled it head on. Funny thing,
that's so important, because I've found myself do that also. Like when prepping for the GMAT, you tend to only focus on your strengths and not at all on the weaknesses, and then the weaknesses are what show up on the exam. So did you go back to the concept files and Scholaranium questions, or how did you prep that?
Yes. So I went back to, I didn't so much take time to go back to the questions. I did go back to the concept files, went through all the application questions all over again. And then maybe, spent not too much time on the Scholaranium, maybe about 20-30 questions just to get a gist again. Funny thing was that I barely got about 2 or 3 questions in my next exam from number properties and inequalities. But yeah, I would tell anyone who's giving the exam, I think it's very important not to kind of not give importance to any particular topic, because something like in my second exam, I got at least, believe it or not, I got at least 5 questions from sets, and which was very strange to me, because you kind of almost regard that topic as something maybe you get 1 or 2 questions from, but I got like 5 questions from sets. And statistics was also a very major contributor to my second paper. So I think it's very important not to ignore any of the topics. I've also heard of stories where people have got like a B46 and they've done really well, but they ignored something as simple as word problems because they were coming from like an engineering background. So they figured they could tackle it on the day of the exam. But that's when it went completely badly.
But
so,
it's also very important
to
know what you did was you also didn't overthink the fact that you were getting 5 questions from sets on the exam, because a lot of people say, okay, 5 questions from sets, is this an experimental question? Am I just doing very poorly, which is why I'm getting sets questions? Like, what am I doing wrong? And you just like push through it.
Right, because honestly, once you're in the exam, there's no point of thinking about all of that, because the amount of if you waste any time thinking about that, you're only going to make yourself more nervous, and even questions that you could get right, you'll end up getting those wrong, because trust me, that time ticking is can be very nerve-wracking. I mean, so you have to kind of just keep focus on the question and be I got a Q49. I think I could have done better. I think I got a Q49 because I missed my last question. I couldn't finish my quant section. I missed my last question. But I mean, it was fine. I'm sorry. I kind of lost what I was going to say there, but yeah, but it was a great experience. I'd never expected myself to get a Q49 because I always felt my cons was very, very weak. And even though it's a 710 and I know that it's not an absolutely exponential score, I'm very happy with it. And I think because I spent
only... Also considering the fact that you had a very hectic work schedule, like you mentioned, you were working 60, 70 hours a week.
Yeah, so I used to work 7 days a week, and because it's a family business and with COVID and all happening, you kind of just needed to be there at work every day. So I was working 7 days a week, and I spent about a dedicated 3 months to studying, wherein I was coming home and making sure I was spending a certain amount of time studying. So I think the progress just from a 640 to 710 within 3 months with a completely active job schedule is not so bad, in my opinion. So yeah, so that's so all of that prep, and just I think the most critical thing in my entire learning process was knowing the basics, which helped me with e-GMAT helped me with versus anything else.
Absolutely. So you have a 710 and you want to apply to MBA schools. You've already applied to a few. Take me through what that process has been like for you.
So I think you have to spend a certain amount of the first thing, of course, was once I got my GMAT score was basically to evaluate what were the kind of average GMAT scores across the schools that I was looking at. I applied to some ambitious schools, some safe schools, mostly like anybody else. Also, I think the added factor of this being a slightly different year, because I believe people are really, really applying for their MBAs this year. The admissions are pouring in. And also that there are a lot of deferrals from last year. So class sizes, I mean, the number of seats available is not like any other year. So kind of make sure that I apply to a sufficient amount of schools to make sure that I get into some place. But yeah, I mean, obviously you have to start with which are the kind of schools that you could apply to, do some research on the locations, their alumni, what are the career options available. I think also one thing that I learned from speaking to a lot of people is that what kind of school you want to go into. Obviously, you don't have to go in knowing completely what it is that you want to do in life. But if you do, then which are the kind of schools that have alumni representing that sector? Because that's I think that's how I've understood hiring happens in US colleges, is that the alumni network of the school. So that kind of research, basically, the courses taught, what do you want to learn, the courses taught at the school. I think that's another very interesting thing of US schools, is the curriculum is very varied. You can choose what are the kind of subjects that you want to study. They're very flexible. So all of that. So once I just did some research on the schools, and basis of my GMAT score, which were the ones that I could apply to. Some were obviously ambitious because of, but I applied to them anyway because those are schools that I've always wanted to go to. So I figured, I mean, there's no harm in applying to those. So yeah, so got my deadlines in. And then I enrolled with a counselor. And I think the first thing that we did was just some deep diving into what my entire profile really is. I started on this process a little late. I think people start on this process at least 6 months in advance, because one of the things that people do with their counselors is to basically figure out what their profile looks like right now and how they could make it better by the time that, they apply to US colleges. So that was one thing that I didn't really get to work on. Nevertheless, just did a deep dive on, what my work experience has been like, what are the key differentiating things in my career that I could mention in my application profile to kind of, showcase some differences and or what stands out basically. And that's how I started, my application process and started applying to schools.
Got it. So you, in our discussion earlier, mentioned that you applied to like 12 schools, and that's a lot. From personal experience, I was applying across round 1, round 2, and I applied to six or seven schools. And I started my MBA application process around June. Started in June, applied in late December for round 2. But I had like 6 months almost of MBA application work done. Right, so that's really how long it takes to write meaningful essays. So 12 is definitely a rush. So how are you feeling about that? Like, do you think it's super rushed?
It's definitely super rushed. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody else unless it was like an absolute necessity. Because I definitely didn't go into the process knowing what it would be like, obviously, because you only once you're in the middle of all of it, you realize what are all the different kind of things that you kind of need to do. Like I mentioned, you would want to speak to some people, speak to almost 5 or 6 people from the target schools that they're applying to, figure out what the school is like. I think that's one of the reasons why you'll find me applying to 12 schools versus some people who are applying only to 4 or 5 schools, because they've actually had the kind of time to really understand what are the schools that they're applying to, and maybe really understand and be able to narrow down the schools that they want to apply to. And me, on the other hand, being at the very doing this process at the very end, have not had that time to maybe, kind of really narrow down or maybe understand, okay, the school does not work for me from my perspective, but I'm probably applying to it anyway because it's in my GMAT range and is maybe in the top 20 or 30 as ranked, in the Financial Times. So it's definitely very overwhelming because, trust me, I've had to write like you mentioned, people take like 4 or 5 months to write meaningful essays. I've had to do that in a week. So I've had to do that in a week. It's deadline out, and all the deadlines are right next to each other. So it's deadline after deadline. It's 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th. So what I can say is the downside of this is I may have definitely done a better job of applying to the first 4 or 5 schools as opposed to the latter end. Like maybe I prepared the initial time that I had, like I gave my GMAT on the 22nd and my first application was due on the 6th of January. So maybe the time that I spent on applying to the first 4 schools that I applied to with the first 4 deadlines they were probably better done than the schools that I applied to later. But at the same time, I mean, once you do the process once with your counselor and you've gone through how you really need to approach your essays and your stories, it's not something which is completely not doable, but it's not preferable is what I would say. Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned earlier to me that you are sort of have lack of clarity when it comes to goals. So what are you writing in your essays from a goals point of view? What have you been advised to do there?
I have a couple of options on the table. One is, of course, to come back to my family business if I'd want to, and one is maybe to re-enter the corporates. Uh, what my goals are at the moment, or maybe at least the way I've discussed portray it in my applications, is that I would want to build on my skills as I elevate my position in my family business, how the kind of alumni network at the schools, the education, and more importantly, just to get experiences from how other people or from all different parts of the world are handling their jobs and solutions and things like that. So the experience, I think this is so basically back in 2013 I had been to NYU for a summer exchange program, and I think that's the point in time I decided to do my MBA in the States, because I'm not being derogatory to anybody who does their education in India, but I think the one thing that really excites me about doing my MBA in the US is the way the education is delivered. Like, it's a very case-based process, like, real life approach on how you need to solve things and how you need to work around things versus textbook reading. So I think that's very critical. Having come from a corporate, moved into a family business, been here 3.5 years, in the middle of people who've been in this business, say, for 33 years. And with believe it or not, this pandemic in a way has kind of changed the way a lot of people look at their businesses. Even the way that I looked at my business, because suddenly you're realizing that you're actually able to operate at the same level of efficiencies with much lesser resources, because you were forced to kind of ideate those or make those decisions. So I think that just to be able to develop my ideas on that and get that experience is one of the reasons that I wanted to pursue my MBA in the US. So the way that I'm portraying it in my applications, of course, is that once I come back to my family business and I want to expand the business, maybe diversify the business into certain different lines, those are my short-term goals, of course, is to bring in efficiencies into the business, and my long-term goals are to develop that kind of network and expertise to be able to expand the business. So
I think it's fantastic that you're mentioning the fact that you have a family business to sort of come back to and help grow, because US schools care a lot about rankings. And rankings are affected heavily by placement rates or number of people who accept jobs in the first 3 months, stuff like that. And if the career team at the school doesn't have to worry about placing you, I think your likelihood of an admit is much higher.
Yes. So this is something that my counselor mentioned to me as well, is that you become an ideal candidate if you don't have to fall into the pool of students that they have to worry about placing. So so I guess especially with the pandemic, I think that would be something that works favorably. So that's kind of how I've structured the application.
You also had some questions about PM and consulting. Maybe I can chime in there, because I'm actually recruiting for PM. I've done PM stuff pre-MBA, and I have a lot of friends doing consulting, so I could help there. So what questions do you have?
So honestly, my questions are very broad, because I'm not even sure what a PM does. So so I think that so my questions are very broad. Of course, consulting, I would just kind of like to understand what the job, both of them, I just kind of understand what the job role is like, because my first job was in finance and my second job has been general management, really. So I haven't really been in the space to understand what maybe marketing would be like, or the role of a product manager would be like. It's something that I've heard a lot of people wanting to do once they do their MBA in the States. So I feel like it's a very popular job choice out there that I'm hearing a lot about, which is slowly coming up in India. And of course, consulting is almost at par with maybe the non-finance version of investment banking out there. So would also want to maybe understand what consulting is like, what the job is like, what's expected out of you, or those kind of things.
Right. So from a PM, I'll talk about PM first, because that's my background. So PM is, again, it's either product management, technical product management, product marketing. They're all sort of the same. They use interchangeably. Depends on the company that you're applying to, right? But broadly speaking, a PM's role is to first identify the needs of a customer. So a lot of interviews, a lot of surveys, a lot of information gathering to understand pain points, come up with an idea for a product, get other people on board. So like other engineers, other designers, other stakeholders, other people who build the product, right? Map out the entire sort of timeline for product delivery, how long it's going to take to build the product, test the product, do usability testing, and then actually release the product, right? So build that entire timeline, launch the product to an audience, hopefully manage the initial, couple of months of sales, and then move on to a different project. So that's the life cycle of a PM on one project. Now, anecdotally, I think I'm the only, or maybe one of the few handful, like maybe one of the 2 or 3 people coming into the college with a PM background, right? So most of the people who are recruiting for PM, and there are a lot of them because tech industry is hiring pretty, fervently. So I am still, I think, one of the only 2 or 3 people with a PM background coming into MBA. People don't have a PM background, they're very easily able to pivot into PM. So even if you don't know what a PM does, it's very easy to get into. I mean, not very easy, but it's very, very doable for you to get into PM. Coming from an ops background, I think that's your background, right?
Right.
So yes, and ops skill sets also translate very well to PM because you have to basically keep the operation lean and you have to keep things moving. You have to deal with a lot of stakeholders. So in ops, you do a lot of that stuff, right?
Right.
So the technical skills you can pick up on the job. You're not expected to code or anything crazy like that. But managing people, also sort of managing budgets and timelines. So a lot of that stuff you do in ops. So I think it's a great pivot for you. Now, consulting is typically out of MBA. It's managerial consulting, management consulting, or strategy consulting, right? And it's basically you have clients who don't really want to spend a bunch of money, putting together teams internally to solve problems. So they outsource their problems to a specialist consulting firm like yours, and you charge them on an hourly basis to solve problems, right? So that's the essence of consulting. From a school's point of view, you have the 3 big consulting firms, McKinsey, Bain, and BCG. They typically recruit only M7 top 10 very heavily. Outside top 10, I don't know that BCG interviews a lot of people. Even top 15, it's a challenge. I know that McKinsey and Bain do, but they don't recruit heavily at all. So as you drop out of top 10, McKinsey interviews. I have a McKinsey interview coming up next week. So McKinsey does interview people in top 20, maybe even top 25, but I don't know that they recruit heavily. One thing about consulting firms is that you have to score an internship with one of these top 3 firms if you want to join these top 3 firms in second year, right? Because McKinsey is not going to get you for a full-time offer if you work in a no-name company. So it's very, very hard. Anecdotally, a friend of mine interned in Dell and wanted to apply to McKinsey full-time. And McKinsey told him that you can try, but you're not going to get in. That's literally the response that he received. So that's consulting for you. Consulting timelines also, I mean, from a recruiting point of view, it's straight out of college. So let's say your college starts in August, sort of recruiting for consulting starts in September, right? So yeah, that's soon. So McKinsey and Bain and BCG, all of these folks have, over the summer, they have some programming scheduled where they sort of get you to talk to some of the directors, some of their partners, get you acquainted with the process. in the summer, like think April, May timeline, right? So if you're really serious about consulting, I think you should gear up, and start doing all of that networking early on. And also buy a couple of casing books. So are you familiar with casing prep?
A little bit. Did a little bit of it in college when McKinsey was coming to hire, but not since.
So yeah, I mean there are. So case in point, for instance, is a Bible for McKinsey folks. So you might want to start casing early on. So when your interviews start happening, let's say in November-ish, you're prepared for those sorts of interviews, because McKinsey is famous for having like a 4-hour interview where people just grill you like crazy. Yeah. So it's not one interview for 4 hours. It's I think 3 interviews back to back to back, and they're all case interviews in the worst sort of industries, the most boring industries, so that you have no previous background in, right? So it's important to be prepped for those sorts of interviews.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned you had some questions or hopes about scholarships. You'll be funding your MBA out of pocket. So could you sort of take me through that? I've got a few scholarships, so maybe I can help around that also.
Right. So actually, that would be great if you could shed some light on that. So the only kind of scholarships that I've been able to track at the moment are the merit-based scholarships that come along with your application. So maybe what could be the best way to get a scholarship? Are there other special agencies that we could, maybe firms or organizations that hand out scholarships that I could reach out to or write letters to or applications to? That would be great to understand.
Yeah, so scholarship through merit is based heavily on your MBA, on your GMAT score rather, and it's quite common for people getting like a 740, 750, 760-ish to receive some sort of financial reward. I think scholarships are very, very important because if you're going to take a student loan, and if you, let's say, go to, have you done any research in this, or it's just sort of in the plan right now? No research. Okay. So if you go to like a private lender like ICICI, right, that's going to cost you about 10.5% and it's compounded, right? So that's the cost. If you assuming you paid back in 7 to 10 years, you'll be paying off effectively almost 70% more than you borrowed. So your interest is going to be 70% of your principal. So this is a lot of financial decisions at stake, which we just don't think about so early on in the process, right? So that's when scholarship becomes very, very important. So if you get like a 50% scholarship, it's a lot of expense you just don't have to worry about, right? So that's why people favor heavily retaking the GMAT, even though they don't necessarily have to, retaking it, so they have a good shot at a higher scholarship, right? When it comes to scholarship, external scholarships, there are a couple of external scholarship applications. They close sometime in April. So you can just Google these MBA scholarships and you'll get a huge list of these applications. Yeah, they do close on April. So you have to write an application, write an essay or something, and apply, and you'll probably get it. The very famous I know of is Mahindra. But these scholarships they're not super significant. I don't know, Mahindra scholarship is like 8 lakh or something. And that's not going to be much, right? So I think your best bet is still the merit scholarship. It'll take off around 40-50% of your tuition amount, and that's a huge saving. And that's mainly based on the GMAT score and also the overall strength of the application.
Got it.
Yeah. Anything else that I can probably help with?
How many years does it usually take to kind of, pay off these loans? Like, do you think like, yeah, the other thing I did want to ask you about, of course, was studying during this pandemic or doing an MBA during the pandemic. Is the experience I understand that a lot of the process of doing an MBA overseas is networking. So if you don't really get to be on campus and you're paying that exponential amount of money for doing that MBA, is it still worth it doing an MBA during the pandemic, or in maybe like the online format?
Right. So that really depends on what your personal goals are to get from the MBA. So one of the things about the MBA, which a lot of people don't realize, is that, or probably realize and don't account for, is that there are a ton of choices when you come to a B school. Like there's always something going on, and always multiple things going on at the same time. So you really have to have clarity of thought about what you want to get out of the MBA, right? So
Right.
if networking is a big thing for you, I would definitely sort of account for the fact that a large part of this is going to be virtual for the foreseeable future. A lot of companies have reverted to the virtual interviewing, virtual networking model. They don't have to spend a bunch of money going to campuses anymore. So I don't see that going back to in-person anytime soon. A lot of the delivery of content, for instance, teaching, right? Schools, like I think you mentioned that even in business, you were forced to innovate and
Right.
forced to disrupt. So schools have been forced to disrupt their textbook style of delivery, and now they've moved to online. So you just don't have to be in college all day, for instance, right? So a lot of those things I don't see going back. And that's going to be across MBA schools. It's just not schools in the US versus like in US, you won't have a different experience there, right? But a lot of in-person networking with your classmates and stuff. I think by the time you get in, that should be better. Definitely, it's been rough for me because right now I'm in Chapel Hill, and most of my domestic classmates aren't here. They're back home for Christmas break and all of that stuff. And my start date has been postponed, so they're not coming back. They're just going to attend school from their hometowns, right? Because basically this town is a ghost town right now. So for me, it's been affected. For you, I think the vaccine should be out, and you should be fine.
Okay. All right. Have you seen this affect hiring on the campus, like number of companies that are coming back to, give summer internships or?
Yeah. So last year was particularly bad because I think Feb is when things got really bad, and Feb is when most offers are handed out. So last year, a
Right.
lot of offers were revoked. And yeah, people recruiting last year had a very tough time. This year, yes, there has been an impact, but people are still getting interviews, still getting offers. But earlier, there would be people with 3, 4 offers at the same time. We're not seeing a lot of that this year. But a lot of the big companies are still recruiting to the same sort of volume as they were previously. So
Okay.
again, by next year or so, I think things should be better, definitely.
Okay. Just a quick question. I just wanted to, you've been living there for a while, I guess. So how much would you estimate is like the average cost of, living there for you?
Again, depends on what school you get in. Depends on, so one of the things that people don't consider also is state versus private school. So state schools are always cheaper. I'm in UNC. UNC is a state school. It's funded by the government of North Carolina, so that's cheaper. Duke, which is literally 10 minutes from UNC, is a private school. It's at least 25% more expensive because a private school, like there's no one funding it, right? So do that calculation. Also, do the calculation based on the city you're going to. Chapel Hill is not a super expensive city. So for me, around 20,000, 22,000 a year should be fine. If you go to NYU, like you mentioned, that's going to be very, very expensive. 25,000 is not going to get you anywhere. So living in New York is going to be very, very expensive, right? So it depends on the city that you're in.
Right. Okay. Got it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking out the time, Mehr. If you have any other questions, I'm always happy to reach out. But this was super productive. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for taking out the time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.